In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a glamorous actress hides a deadly secret, who's sending chilling threats to Leela Voss. Why does danger lurk behind her dazzling smile? Join Miss Marple as she unravels a web of envy, betrayal, and vengeance. Every clue could be a trap, and every shadow hides a killer. Will she stop a murderer before the final curtain falls? Chapter 1. The Arrival of the Starlet. The late summer sun draped St. Mary Mead in a golden haze, its rays filtering through the ancient oaks that lined the village square. Miss Jane Marple sat by her lace-curtained window, her delicate fingers cradling a cup of Earl Grey, the steam curling like a whisper of secrets. Her cottage, a quaint relic of ivy and weathered stone, hummed with the quiet rhythm of a village untouched by time. Yet, today, a ripple disturbed the stillness. A sleek black Bentley, its chrome gleaming like a predator's eye, rolled to a stop outside the old Haverford Manor at the edge of the village. Miss Marple's sharp blue eyes narrowed, catching the flutter of a fur coat as a figure emerged from the car. The village had been abuzz for days with rumours of a new tenant, but no one had anticipated her Leela Voss, the darling of London's West End, whose name adorned marquees and scandal sheets alike. Her arrival was as theatrical as her reputation, her crimson lips parting in a practised smile as she surveyed the manor's ivy-clad facade. A small crowd of villagers, Mrs. Price from the bakery, young Tommy the postboy, and old Mr. Harrow with his perpetually sceptical squint gathered at a respectful distance, their whispers a soft chorus of awe and curiosity. Miss Marple set her teacup down, the porcelain clinking gently against its saucer. "Well now," she murmured to herself, "this promises to be interesting." She adjusted her spectacles and leaned closer to the window, noting the way Lila's gloved hand lingered on the car door, as if reluctant to let go of its polished security. There was something in the actress's posture, a tightness, a flicker of unease that belied the radiant confidence of her public persona. Miss Marple's mind, ever attuned to the subtleties of human behaviour, filed this observation away like a card in her mental index. By noon, the village tea shop, the Bluebell, was a hive of gossip. Miss Marple, clad in her sensible tweed skirt and a lavender cardigan, made her way there, her straw hat tilted just so against the sun. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, greeted by the warm scent of scones and the chatter of familiar voices. Mrs. Bantry, her old friend and fellow enthusiast of village intrigue, waved her over to a corner table, her eyes alight with excitement. "Jane, have you seen her?" Mrs. Bantry's voice was a conspiratorial whisper, though loud enough to turn heads. "Leela Voss, in the flesh. They say she's escaping some dreadful scandal in London, a lover's spat, or perhaps something juicier. What do you make of it?" Miss Marple smiled faintly, her fingers smoothing the edge of the tablecloth. "People do come to St. Mary Mead for all sorts of reasons, Dolly. Rest, refuge, or perhaps to hide." Her tone was mild, but her eyes gleamed with the quiet intensity of a hawk spotting movement in the grass, as if summoned by the conversation. The tea shop door swung open, and Leela Voss herself stepped inside. The room fell silent, save for the clink of a dropped teaspoon. She was a vision tall and willowy, her auburn hair cascading in waves beneath a chic cloche hat, her emerald green dress clinging to her like a second skin. Yet it was her eyes that held Miss Marple's attention, dark, luminous, and shadowed with something unspoken. "Good afternoon," Lila said, her voice a melodic lilt that carried the polish of the stage. "Might I trouble you for a pot of chamomile tea? It's been rather a long journey." Mrs. Weatherby, The shop's stout proprietress flushed as she hurried to comply, muttering about the honor of serving such a luminary. Leela settled. At a table near the window, her movements graceful but deliberate, as if every gesture were part of a performance. The villagers resumed their chatter, though their eyes darted toward her like moths to a flame. Miss Marple, ever discreet, sipped her tea and observed. She noted the way Leela's fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the teapot, the quick glance she cast over her shoulder when the door jingled again. It was Tommy, delivering the day's post, and he approached Leela's table with a small envelope. "For you, Miss Voss," he said, his cheeks pink with admiration. "Came to the manor this morning, but you'd already left." Leela's smile tightened as she took the envelope, her nails gleaming like polished rubies. "Thank you, dear boy," she said, her tone warm but strained. She slit the envelope, open with a butter knife, her movements precise, and unfolded a single sheet of paper. For a moment, her face froze, the color draining from her cheeks. Then, with a laugh that rang a touch too bright, she tucked the letter into her handbag and resumed sipping her tea. Miss Marple's knitting needles, which had materialized from her bag, clicked softly. Curious, she murmured to Mrs. Bantry, who was craning her neck to see. A letter that unsettles a woman like Lila Voss must be quite something. Probably a fan, or some dreadful critic, Mrs. Bantry suggested, but Miss Marple shook her head, her mind already spinning threads of possibility. She recalled a similar incident years ago, when young Elsie Carter received anonymous notes before her engagement fell apart in a storm of betrayal. People, Miss Marple knew, were rarely as opaque as they believed themselves to be. As the afternoon waned, Lila rose, leaving a generous tip that sent Mrs. Weatherby into raptures. She paused by Miss Marple's table, perhaps drawn by the elderly woman's unassuming presence. "You must be Miss Marple," she said, her smile softening. "The villagers speak of you with such fondness. I'm told you have a knack for understanding things." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her. "Spectacles? Oh, I'm just an old spinster who enjoys a good chat, Miss Voss. But I do find people fascinating. They're rather like plays, don't you think? Full of hidden cues and unexpected twists." Lila's laugh was genuine this time, though it carried a brittle edge. "You're not wrong. Perhaps I'll invite you to the manor for tea sometime. I could use a friend who sees beyond the footlights." "I'd be delighted," Miss Marple replied, her voice as warm as the tea in her cup. But as Lila swept out, the bell jingling in her wake, Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the handbag, where the letter had vanished. There was a story there, she was certain, and not one of the pleasant variety. The day drifted into evening, the village settling into its familiar quiet. Miss Marple took her customary stroll along the lane, her stick tapping lightly on the cobblestones. The manor loomed in the distance, its windows glowing like eyes in the dusk. She paused by the wrought iron gate, her attention caught by a glint in the Grasser single pearl earring, its luster dulled by the dew. She bent to retrieve it, her fingers brushing the cool metal. It was an exquisite piece, likely expensive, and certainly not something a villager would misplace. "Careless," she murmured, slipping the earring into her pocket. "Or perhaps deliberate." Her mind flitted to Leela's trembling hands, the letter's chilling effect. In her experience, such tokens were rarely lost without reason. She recalled a case in her youth when a misplaced locket had unraveled a web of jealousy and deceit. People, she thought, were so very predictable in their unpredictability. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting resuming its rhythmic dance. The village was peaceful, the manor's lights a distant beacon, yet beneath the calm she sensed a gathering storm. Leela Voss had brought more than glamour to St. Mary. To St. Mary, Michi had brought a mystery, one that whispered of danger and secrets yet to be unveiled. For now, though, the day had ended without incident, the village's serenity intact. Miss Marple smiled to herself, content to let the puzzle simmer, her mind already weaving the first threads of understanding. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring new clues, new faces, and perhaps a step closer to the truth behind the actress's shadowed gaze. Chapter 2. Whispers in the wings. The morning mist clung to St. Mary Mead like a gossamer veil, softening the outlines of its thatched cottages and cobblestone lanes. Miss Jane Marple sat in her rose-scented garden, her knitting needles paused. As she sipped her morning tea, the delicate china cup warm against her fingers. The pearl earring and embroidered glove from the previous day rested in a small wooden box beside her, their presence a quiet challenge to her curiosity. The village was still abuzz with Leela Voss's arrival, and today's event a gathering at Haverford. Manor promised to draw the threads of this mystery tighter. Miss Marple adjusted her shawl and set out, her stick tapping lightly as she navigated the path to the manor. The grand estate loomed ahead, its stone facade softened by climbing ivy, its windows catching the morning light like wary eyes. A small crowd had already gathered in the drawing room, its high ceilings and velvet drapes lending an air of faded grandeur. Leela, radiant in a sapphire gown that shimmered like a midnight sea, stood by a roaring fire, her voice weaving tales of her theatrical triumphs, a heart-stopping performance in Othello, a near miss with a falling chandelier during Pig. The villagers, from Mrs. Price with her flower-dusted apron to young Jenny from the post office, listened with rapt attention, their faces alight with wonder. Among the guests, Miss Marple noted 3 strangers, their city polish stark against the village's rustic charm. Clara Henshaw, a rival actress, lounged with a smile as sharp as cut glass, her auburn curls pinned with deliberate elegance. Edmund Drake, a director with a furrowed brow and restless hands, sipped brandy with a distracted air. Sophie Lane, a pale understudy, hovered at the edges, her eyes flitting nervously between Leela and the floor. Miss Marple, tucked into a plush armchair with her knitting, watched their interplay. Clara's veiled barbs, Edmund's strained chuckles, Sophie's bitten lip like a script unfolding before her, as Leela recounted a scandalous feud with a costume designer. The room's atmosphere shifted. Mr. Greaves, the manor's stooped butler, entered with a silver tray, a single cream-coloured envelope balanced upon it. "Miss Voss," he said, his voice like dry leaves. "This arrived at the gate." Leela's smile froze, her fingers brushing the envelope as if it might bite. The room's chatter hushed, all eyes on her as she slit it open with a hairpin. Her movements precise but tense. Her eyes scanned the page, and for a heartbeat, her mask slipped a flicker of fear, raw and unguarded, before she forced a laugh. "Another admirer with too much time," she said, crumpling the paper and tossing it into the fire. The flames devoured it, casting fleeting shadows across her face. "Shall we continue?" Clara leaned forward, her voice honeyed but sharp. "My, Leela, you do attract the most devoted fans. Nothing serious, I hope." "Oh, nothing I can't handle," Leela replied, her tone airy but her eyes darting to Clara's smirk. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her mind snagging on the moment. The letter, she sensed, was no mere fan scribble. It echoed a memory from years past, when anonymous notes had unravelled a village romance, each word a barb that drew. Blood, secrets, she knew, thrived in silence. The gathering shifted to a light-hearted reenactment of the importance of being earnest, Leela directing with infectious enthusiasm. The villagers stumbled through their lines, giggling as Tommy mispronounced Bunbury, while Clara and Sophie delivered theirs with polished ease. Edmund, sprawled in a chair, offered critiques with a wary edge, his gaze lingering on Leela's graceful gestures. Miss Marple noted Sophie's hesitation during a line about deception, her voice catching as if the words struck too close to home, thus the performance wound down. Miss Marple slipped out to the Manor's terrace, the cool air, a relief after the room's warmth. The gardens stretched before her, their neatly trimmed hedges and blooming dahlias a testament to the Manor's care. Her eyes wandered to a stone bench near a fountain, where a glint caught her attention, a silver cigarette case, its surface etched with a swirling sea. She bent to retrieve it, her fingers tracing the initials. Clara's, or another player in this unfolding drama. It was too fine for a villager, too carelessly left for mere oversight. A soft tread on the gravel startled her. Turning, she saw Sophie, her face pale under the morning sun, her hands twisting. "A handkerchief, Miss Marple," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect to find you here. I was just clearing my head. Lost something, perhaps?" Miss Marple asked, holding up the cigarette case with a gentle smile. "This isn't yours, I presume?" Sophie's eyes widened, then dropped to the ground. "No, it's not. Mine. I should get back." She turned and hurried away, her footsteps uneven. Miss Marple tucked the case into her bag, her mind spinning. The glove, the earring. Now this Seach item, a breadcrumb in a trail she was only beginning to follow. The gathering ended with applause and laughter, Lila's charm weaving a spell over the villagers as they spilled onto the lawn for lemonade. She stood at the Manor's steps, her smile a beacon. Though Miss Marple caught the flicker of strain in her eyes as she glanced at Clara and Edmund. The villagers dispersed, their chatter bright with the thrill of the morning's entertainment. Miss Marple lingered, her gaze sweeping the garden where the cigarette case had lain. The day had been a tapestry of laughter and hidden tensions, a performance as carefully staged as any play. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple settled by her window, her knitting a steady rhythm as she turned over the morning's events. Radiance had captivated all, but the letter's shadow, the cigarette case, and Sophie's nervous flight hinted at a deeper story, one of rivalry, perhaps, or betrayal. The village slept quietly, the Manor's lights fading into the dusk, but Miss Marple felt the pulse of something darker beneath the surface. For now, the gathering had ended on a note of camaraderie, its secrets held at bay. But the stage was set, and Miss Marple knew the next scene would bring new revelations. Each clue a step closer to the heart of Leela Voss's shadowed world. Chapter 3. The Poisoned Chalice. The evening air in St. Mary Mead carried a crisp edge, the stars emerging like sequins above the silhouette of Haverford Manor. Miss Jane Marple, dressed in a modest navy frock with a cameo brooch, made her way to the Manor for Leila Voss's much-anticipated dinner party. The village had buzzed all day with speculation about the event, a rare chance to glimpse the actress's world of glamour. Miss Marple's bag, slung over her arm, held the pearl earring, embroidered glove, and silver cigarette case, silent tokens of a mystery deepening with each passing hour. The Manor's dining hall glowed with the warmth of chandeliers, their light dancing on crystal goblets and polished silver. Leila, resplendent in a crimson gown that seemed to pulse with life, greeted her guests with a radiant smile, though Miss Marple noted a faint tightness around her eyes. The table was a mosaic of faces, villagers like Mrs. Bantry, agog with excitement, Clara Henshaw, her emerald earrings glinting with every sharp glance, Edmund Drake, nursing a glass of claret with a distracted air, and Sophie Lane, fidgeting, with her napkin, her face half hidden by a curtain of mousy hair. Other guests included Mr. Harrow, the sceptical grocer, and Dr. Haydock, the village physician, whose keen eyes rivaled Miss Marple's own as the first course of delicate consomme was served. Lila raised an ornate goblet, its etched surface catching the light. "Two new friends and new beginnings," she toasted, her voice a melody that hushed the room. The guests clinked glasses, their murmurs of agreement mingling with the clatter of cutlery. Miss Marple, seated near the end of the table, sipped her water, her gaze flitting between Clara's sly smile and Edmund's restless fingers drumming on the tablecloth. The conversation turned to Leela's career, her tales of Broadway triumphs and backstage rivalries weaving a spell over the guests. Clara interjected with a barbed anecdote about a shared production, her tone implying a grudge older than the manner itself. "You always did steal the spotlight, Leela," she said, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Sophie, silent until now, muttered something about loyalty, her words lost in the din but her flushed cheeks betraying her agitation. Midway through, the main course roast pheasant with a rosemary-glazed lilla reached for her goblet again, her laughter trailing off as she took a sip. A sudden gasp tore from her throat, her hand clutching her chest as the goblet slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the table. The room froze, all eyes on her as she swayed, her face paling to a ghostly white. "My throat," she whispered, collapsing into her chair in a swoon that was anything but theatrical. Dr. Haydock sprang to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor. "Stand back," he barked, loosening Leela's collar as he checked her pulse. "She's breathing, but barely. Smell that glass almonds, faint but unmistakable." He sniffed the goblet, his expression grim. "Arsenic, I'd wager. Someone fetch my bag from the car." Chaos erupted, guests murmuring in panic as Mr. Greaves, the butler, rushed to comply. Miss Marple remained seated, her knitting needles still, her mind racing. Arsenic was no accident. It was deliberate, precise, a poisonous choice. She recalled a case in the village years ago, when a jilted lover had laced a rival's tea with belladonna, the act uncovered only by a stray remark about a bitter taste. Here, the goblet's contents had been tampered with, but by whom? Dr. Haydock administered a saline solution from his bag, his steady hands coaxing Lila back to consciousness. Her eyes fluttered open, dazed but alive, as the guests hovered, their faces a mix of relief and suspicion. "I'm all right," Lila murmured, her voice hoarse. "Just a spell, perhaps." "Nonsense," Dr. Haydock said sharply. "That was no spell. Someone tried to poison you, Miss Voss. We need the police." The word poison sent a ripple through the room. Clara's hand tightened on her fork. Edmund's glass paused halfway to his lips, and Sophie's napkin fell to the floor, her fingers trembling as she retrieved it. Miss Marple's gaze darted between them, noting the fleeting exchange of glances. Clara to Edmund, Sophie to the goblet, and back again. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, but no one spoke out. As the police were summoned, Leela was moved to a chaise in the drawing room, a blanket draped over her shoulders. The villagers whispered among themselves, their earlier awe replaced by unease. Miss Marple slipped away from the chaos, her stick tapping softly as she approached the dining table. The goblet, now in Dr. Haydock's custody, was off, but her eyes scanned the tablecloth, spotting a faint stain near Leela's plate, a drop of wine, perhaps, or something more sinister. She bent closer, her fingers brushing the fabric, when a shadow fell across her. "Miss Marple, always so curious," Clara said, her voice smooth but edged with mockery. "Found anything to rival your village yarns?" "Oh, nothing so dramatic," Miss Marple replied, her tone mild. "Just a spot on the cloth. Careless, don't you think, in such a fine setting?" Clara's smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed. "Careless indeed," she said, turning away with a swish of her skirt. Miss Marple watched her go, her mind cataloguing the exchange. Clara's poise was too perfect, her interest a keen. A rival with a motive, perhaps. The police arrived, led by Inspector Craddock, a young man with a sharp mind and a grudging respect for Miss Marple's insights. He questioned the guests, his notebook filling with alibis and evasions. Edmund claimed he'd been pouring wine. Clara insisted she'd been deep in conversation, and Sophie stammered about refilling her water glass. No one admitted to touching Leela's goblet, and the kitchen staff swore the wine had been poured from a sealed bottle. The poison, it seemed, had appeared by magic, a notion Miss Marple dismissed with a quiet hum. As the guests dispersed, Leela remained in the drawing room, her composure returning, but her eyes haunted. Miss Marple approached, offering a gentle smile. "You've had quite a fright, my dear," she said, "but you're safe now. Might I ask, have you enemies who'd go to such lengths?" Lila's laugh was brittle, like glass on the verge of shattering. "Enemies? In my line of work, they're as common as curtain calls. But this—" She trailed off, her fingers brushing the blanket. "This feels personal." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to the letter from the previous day, burned before it could be read. "Personal indeed," she murmured, patting Leela's hand. "Rest now, we'll sort this out." The manor grew quiet as the guests departed, the police cordoning off the dining hall for further investigation. Miss Marple walked home under a velvet sky, the village hushed save for the distant hoot of an owl. The dinner had ended in shock, but not tragedy. Lila's life, spared by Dr. Haydock's quick thinking. Yet the poison lingered in Miss Marple's thoughts, as did the stained tablecloth, the exchanged glances, and the weight of secrets unspoken. She settled by her fire, her knitting resuming its steady rhythm, the clues aligning like stars in a constellation. The night was calm, the danger averted for now, but Miss Marple knew the poisoner was still out there, their next move waiting in the wings. Chapter 4. Shadows of the Past. The dawn broke over St. Mary Mead with a soft, pearly light, casting long shadows across the dukest lanes. Miss Jane Marple sat at her breakfast table, her toast untouched as she turned the silver cigarette case. Over in her hands, its etched sea glinting in the morning sun, the pearl earring, embroidered glove, and now this case formed a growing collection of clues, each whispering of the danger circling Lila Voss. The near poisoning at the manor's dinner party had left the village on edge, and today, with police inquiries underway, Miss Marple sensed the threads of this mystery were about to tighten. She donned her tweed coat and a sturdy hat, her stick tapping a purposeful rhythm as she made her way to the village square. The police station, a modest brick building beside the post office, hummed with activity. Inspector Craddock had summoned Lila and her entourage for questioning, and Miss Marple, invited as a local observer due to her reputation, slipped into a corner of the cramped interview room. Her knitting needles clicked softly, a counterpoint to the tension as Leela, pale but composed in a dove-grey dress, recounted the previous night's events. I've no idea who'd want me dead, Leela said, her voice steady but her fingers twisting a silk scarf. I've had my share of rivals, but poison, it's unthinkable. Her eyes flicked to Clara Henshaw, who sat with a cool smile, and Edmund Drake, whose fidgeting betrayed his unease. Sophie Lane, hunched in her chair, avoided everyone's gaze, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Inspector Craddock's pen scratched across his notebook. Miss Voss, you mentioned a letter yesterday, burned before we could see it. Any others? Like it, Lila hesitated, then nodded. A few, over the past month. Vague threats, unsigned. I thought they were just jealous fans. She produced a small bundle of envelopes from her handbag, their edges crumpled as if gripped too tightly. Craddock took them, his brow furrowing as he read phrases like, "Your lies will bury you, and the stage won't save you." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind flitting to a village scandal decades ago, when anonymous notes had exposed a hidden affair, each word a spark that ignited ruin. "Curious," she murmured, catching Craddock's eye. "Might I see those, Inspector?" He passed her the letters, and she scanned them, noting the precise handwriting, the expensive paper. Not the work of a casual crank, but someone with means and motive. She handed them back, her gaze lingering on Clara's poised stillness and Sophie's nervous twitch. The interviews concluded with no clear suspect, the alibis too tangled to unravel yet. Lila returned to the manor, escorted by a constable, while Clara and Edmund lingered in the square, their whispered argument cut short when they spotted Miss Marple. Sophie had slipped away, her absence noted by Miss Marple's keen eyes. Determined to follow a hunch, she made her way to Haverford Manor, where Lila had agreed to a private chat over tea. The manor's library, lined with leather-bound volumes and heavy oak shelves, was a cocoon of quiet. Lila, seated by a window overlooking the rose garden, poured tea with a trembling hand. "You must think me foolish, Miss Marple," she said, her voice low, "to dismiss those letters, to think I could outrun my past." "Not foolish, my dear," Miss Marple replied, her tone gentle. "People often hope the past stays buried, but it has a way of surfacing, doesn't it?" She sipped her tea, her eyes kind but probing. "Tell me, is there someone from your theatre days who might feel wronged?" Leela's gaze drifted to the garden, her fingers tightening on her cup. "There was a role, years ago, lead in Hedda Gabler. I won it over another actress, Marina Cole. She was talented, but unstable. She swore I'd stolen her chance, her life. Last I heard, she'd left the stage, vanished into obscurity." Her voice wavered. "Could she?" Miss Marple nodded, filing the name away. "Old wounds can fester," she said. "But let's not jump to conclusions." Sensing fatigue, she excused herself, her curiosity pulling her toward the manor's upper floors. The attic, she'd heard from Mrs. Bantry, was a treasure trove of forgotten relics, and Miss Marple had a knack for finding truths in dust. The attic stairs creaked under her careful steps, the air thick with the scent of old wood and mothballs. Sunlight slanted through a cracked skylight, illuminating trunks and crates stacked like forgotten props. She opened one, revealing yellowed playbills from Lila's early career, their headlines praising her rise to fame. Tucked beneath was a leather-bound diary, its pages brittle but legible. The entries, written in a looping hand, spoke of ambition, betrayal, and a name Marina Cole circled in angry ink, followed by cryptic phrases. "She pay for what she took." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The diary wasn't Lelos, perhaps. a stagehand's or a friend's. She slipped it into her bag, her mind racing. As she descended, a shadow moved at the far end of the attic, the faint scrape of boots on wood. "Who's there?" She called, her voice steady despite the prickle of unease. No answer came, but the air grew heavy, the silence charged. She reached the stairs just as a figure darted past the garden below, cloaked in a dark scarf that obscured their face. Miss Marple hurried to the window, but the figure vanished into the hedge maze. A moment later, the gardener, Mr. Finch, emerged, his rake in hand, his expression bland as he nodded to her. "Just tending the roses, ma'am," he said, but his eyes lingered too long. Suspicion stirred, but Miss Marple kept her counsel, returning to the village as dusk settled. The day's revelations, the letters, the diary, the fleeting figure wove a tighter web around Lila's peril. She recalled a similar case, when a hidden diary had exposed a blackmail scheme in St. Mary Mead, the truth emerging only after a near-tragic misunderstanding. Tonight the manor stood quiet, Lila safe under police watch, the village lulled by its familiar calm. Miss Marple settled by her fire, her knitting a soft rhythm as she turned the clues over in her mind. The diary's words, Marina's grudge, and the gardener's timely appearance hinted at a past clawing its way into the present. The day had ended with questions unanswered, but danger held at bay, a fragile peace cloaking the village. Yet Miss Marple knew the shadows were gathering, their secrets poised to spill into the light. Chapter 5. The Rehearsal of Death. The afternoon sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden glow, its warmth a stark contrast to the chill that lingered in Miss Jane Marple's thoughts. The village hall, a sturdy stone building festooned with ivy, buzzed with anticipation as Lila Voss's comeback rehearsal drew a curious crowd. Miss Marple, her shawl draped over her shoulders, made her way to the hall, her bag heavier with the weight of clues, the pearl earring, embroidered glove, silver cigarette case, and the cryptic diary from the manor's attic. The near poisoning and whispered threats had cast a shadow over Lila's glamour, and today's rehearsal promised to be a stage for more than just theatrics inside. The hall was alive with the hum of preparation. Wooden chairs lined the walls, filled with villagers eager for a glimpse of Lila's craft. On the makeshift stage, a backdrop of painted stars framed a scene from Romeo and Juliet, its tragic romance a fitting mirror for the tensions simmering beneath the surface. Lila, in a flowing ivory dress, directed with a commanding grace, her voice weaving magic as she coached Tommy, the postboy, through a clumsy Mercutio. Clara Henshaw, poised as Lady Capulet, delivered her lines with icy precision, while Sophie Lane, cast as a hesitant Juliet, stumbled over her words, her eyes darting to the wings. Edmund Drake, slouched in a director's chair, barked corrections, his temper fraying with each missed. Miss Marple settled in the back row, her knitting needles clicking like a metronome, her gaze sweeping the scene. She noted Clara's sharp glances at Lila, Edmund's restless pacing, and Sophie's nervous habit of twisting her bracelet, silver band etched with tiny roses. The diary's mention of Marina Cole, the actress whose career Lila had eclipsed, lingered in her mind, as did the shadowy figure in the manor's garden. Each clue was a thread, and today, Miss Marple sensed, the tapestry might shift as the rehearsal reached the duel scene. Lila handed Tommy a prop dagger, its blade dulled for safety. "Feel the rage, Tommy," she urged, her eyes alight. Fire burns bright before it's snuffed out. Tommy lunged awkwardly, drawing laughter from the crowd, but Miss Marple's attention snagged on the dagger's handler glint of steel where wood should have been. Her breath caught. A real blade, swapped under the guise of rehearsal. She rose, her stick tapping softly as she approached the stage. "Miss Voss," she called, her voice gentle but firm, "might I see that dagger a moment?" Lila paused, surprised, but handed it over. Miss Marple turned it in her hands, the blade's edge catching the light sharp. Lethal, no prop at all. A murmur rippled through the crowd as Lila's face paled. This isn't ours," she stammered. "The props are checked daily." Edmund leaped up, his face flushed. "Impossible. I inspected them myself this morning." His protest rang hollow, and Miss Marple noted Sophie's sudden stillness, her bracelet glinting as she gripped the stage curtain. Inspector Craddock, present at Leela's insistence, took the dagger, his expression grim. "This is no mistake," he said, signalling a constable to bag it. "Someone meant harm." The rehearsal halted, the villagers' chatter turning to whispers of sabotage. Clara's eyes narrowed, her lips curling in a faint smirk, while Edmund muttered about incompetent stagehands. Sophie, trembling, excused herself to the back room, claiming a headache. Miss Marple followed, her instincts prickling. The back room, cluttered with costumes and props, was dim, its air heavy with dust. Sophie stood by a window, her back to the door, her shoulders shaking. "Miss Lane," Miss Marple said softly, "you seem unwell. Is there something you'd like to share?" Sophie whirled, her eyes wide. I don't know anything about the dagger," she blurted, her voice cracking. I can't stand all this tension." Her fingers twisted the bracelet, and Miss Marple's gaze lingered on it to match for the cigarette cases. Floral etchings. "Sometimes," Miss Marple said, her tone kind, speaking a truth, however small, can ease a heavy heart. Sophie's lips parted, but she shook her head and fled, leaving Miss Marple to ponder the bracelet's significance. A lover's gift, a family heirloom, or a link to Marina Cole's shadowed past. The rehearsal resumed, the dagger replaced with a safe prop, but the mood was strained. As the scene ended, Lila took center stage, her voice steady as she thanked the crowd for their support. "We'll not let fear dim our light," she declared, earning applause, though Miss Marple sensed the effort behind her bravado. As the villagers dispersed, a sudden shout echoed from the lane outside. Miss Marple hurried out, her stick tapping urgently to find Mr. Finch, the gardener, chasing a cloaked figure through the fog-shrouded fields. The figure vanished into the mist, but Finch returned, breathless, holding a torn scrap of cloth-black velvet, edged with silver thread. "Caught it on a thorn," he said, handing it to Craddock. Whoever they were watching the hall. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The cloth was fine, theatrical, not unlike a costume cloak. She recalled the attic diaries, bitter entries, the gardener's timely appearances. "Mr. Finch," she asked, "do you often patrol the lanes at dusk?" "Only when I hear odd noises," he replied, his gaze steady but his hands clenching the rake. Miss Marple nodded, filing the moment away. The cloth joined her collection, its silver thread a new clue in the puzzle. Back at the hall, Leela confided in Miss Marple as they shared a moment by the stage. "I feel eyes on me always," she whispered, her hands clasped. "That dagger. It's as if someone wants my final scene to be real." "Someone does," Miss Marple said gently, "but they've not succeeded yet. Tell me, did Marina Cole ever wear a distinctive bracelet, perhaps with roses?" Lila frowned, then nodded. "Yes, a silver one. She said it was her mother's." "Why?" Just a thought, Miss Marple replied, her mind racing. Sophie's bracelet, the cigarette case, the diary, were they Marina's or a pretender's? The fog thickened as she walked home, the village settling into its evening hush. The rehearsal had ended with applause, the danger of the dagger averted, but the cloaked figure and the velvet scrap hinted at a threat still lurking. Miss Marple settled by her fire, her knitting a steady rhythm as she wove the day's clues into her mental tapestry. The stage was set for Lila's performance, but the true drama, she knew, was far from its final act. Chapter 6. Curtain Call Confessions. The evening draped St. Mary Mead in a velvet hush, the village's lanterns casting soft pools of light along the cobblestone lanes. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl snug against the autumn chill, made her way to Haverford Manor, her mind a whirl of clues, the pearl earring, embroidered glove, silver cigarette case, attic diary, and now the torn velvet cloth with its silver thread. The near-fatal dagger at the rehearsal had sharpened the mystery surrounding Lila Voss, and tonight, on the eve of her comeback performance, Miss Marple sensed the threads of deceit were about to unravel. The manor's library glowed with the warmth of a crackling fire, its shelves heavy with leather-bound tomes and the weight of secrets. Leela had invited a small group for a final rehearsal discussion, but Miss Marple had requested a private gathering to probe deeper. The room held only the key players. Leela, radiant but strained in a violet silk dress. Clara Henshaw, her eyes glittering with guarded amusement. Edmund Drake, his fingers tapping nervously on a brandy glass. And Sophie Lane, her rose-etched bracelet catching the firelight as she fidgeted. The air was thick with anticipation. Like the pause before a storm, Miss Marple settled into her backed chair, her knitting needle silent for once, her gaze gentle but piercing. "Miss Voss," she began, her voice soft as a whisper in a confessional, "you've been remarkably brave, but I suspect there's more to your story than you've shared. Shall we lay the cards on the table?" Leela's smile wavered, her fingers brushing her throat where the poison had nearly claimed her. "I've told you about Marina Cole," she said. "Her grudge, her disappearance. What more is there?" "Quite a bit, I think," Miss Marple replied, her eyes flicking to Clara. "Miss Henshaw, you've spoken of rivalries, but there's a bitterness in your words that suggests a deeper wound. Did you know Marina well?" Clara's laugh was sharp, like a snapped string. Marina was a dreamer, too fragile for the stage's claws. She blamed Lila for her fall, but I had no part in it. Her fingers toyed with an emerald pendant, its green fire a match for her eyes. Miss Marple nodded, turning to Edmund. "And you, Mr. Drake, seemed troubled by more than a faulty prop. Financial straits, perhaps, a production tied to Leela's success." Edmund's glass clinked against the table, his face flushing. "I'm in no worse shape than any director." He snapped, "Leela's my star, not my noose." But his eyes darted to Sophie, who shrank into her chair. "Miss Lane," Miss Marple said gently, "your bracelet is lovely. A family heirloom, perhaps, or a gift from someone, like Marina Cole." Sophie's gasp was audible, her hand covering the bracelet. It was my mother's," she stammered. "I never knew Marina." "Why would you?" Her words were cut off by a sudden blackout, the room plunging into darkness as the fire's glow cast eerie shadows. A scuffle sounded near the door, followed by a muffled curse. Miss Marple's hand tightened on her stick, her senses sharp. "Stay calm," she called, as Leela lit a candle, its flame trembling in her hand. The light revealed Edmund by the door, his face pale. "Just checking the fuse," he muttered, but Miss Marple's eyes caught a glint in his Pokita penknife, its blade flecked with ink. She recalled the diary's angry scrawl, the precise handwriting of the threatening letters. "Mr. Drake," she said, "might I see that knife?" Reluctantly, he handed it over, and Miss Marple turned it in the candlelight, noting the engraved ED, useful for more than cutting paper. "I imagine," she said, "perhaps forging documents, a contract, say, to secure funds." Edmund's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Clara stood, her voice icy. "Enough games, Miss Marple. If you've accusations, make them plain." "Very well, miss," Marple said, her tone unshaken. "Miss Henshaw, your pranks Betty notes perhaps stem from envy, but they lack the venom of true malice. Mr. Drake, your debts pushed you to desperation, forging papers to bind Lila to a failing production. But the poison, the dagger, the letters, they point elsewhere." Her gaze settled on Sophie, whose face crumpled. "Miss Lane, your bracelet matches the cigarette case, a relic of Marina Cole's. But you're not her, are you? You're her sister, carrying her grudge, her pain. The diary, the threats, they're yours, born of a promise Marina made you keep." Sophie's sob broke the silence, her hands covering her face. "She was my sister," she whispered. "Leela stole her role, her life. Marina died broken, and I swore I'd make Leela pay. But I didn't want her dead, just." Scared, Leela's eyes widened, her voice soft. "Sophie, I never knew. I thought Marina left of her own accord." Miss Marple's expression softened. "Grief can twist the heart, Miss Lane, but there's another hand at play." She turned to the door, where Mr. Finch, the gardener, stood, summoned earlier under the guise of delivering firewood. His eyes, usually bland, burned with a quiet intensity. "Mr. Finch," Miss Marple said, "or should I say Mr. Cole, Marina and Sophie's brother, long estranged, but never far from their pain. The velvet cloth, the figure in the garden you've been watching, planning, the poison. Was your doing, wasn't it? A brother's vengeance for a sister lost." Finch's face twisted, his hand reaching for a hidden pocket, but Inspector Craddock, alerted by Miss Marple's earlier note, stepped from the shadows, his constables at the ready. "That's enough," Craddock said, seizing Finch's arm. A vial of powder arsenic clattered to the floor, sealing his guilt. As Finch was led away, Sophie collapsed in tears, Lila kneeling to comfort her. Clara and Edmund exchanged stunned glances, their own secrets laid bare but overshadowed by the greater crime. The library grew quiet, the fire's crackle the only sound as the truth settled like dust. Miss Marple rose, her stick tapping softly. "A sad business," she said, "but truth has a way of finding the light." Lila met her gaze, gratitude mingling with relief. The night ended with confessions aired, alliances mended, and the manor's shadows dispelled. Miss Marple walked home under a starlit sky, the village calm, the danger resolved for now. Tomorrow's performance would go on, and she felt a quiet satisfaction in seeing the puzzle's pieces fall into place, the curtain closing on this act of deceit. Chapter 7. The final bow. The evening sky over St. Mary Mead shimmered with a cascade of stars, their light a quiet benediction over the village's thatched roofs and winding lanes. The village hall, aglow with lanterns, buzzed with anticipation, as Leela Voss's comeback performance drew a crowd that spilled onto the lawn. Miss Jane Marple, clad in a soft grey dress with a pearl brooch, took her seat in the front row, her knitting bag tucked beside her, its contents the pearl earring, embroidered glove, silver cigarette case, attic diary, and velvet cloth now, relics of a mystery resolved. The unmasking of Mr. Finch as Leela's would-be killer, and Sophie's tearful confession had lifted the shadow from Haverford Manor. But tonight's performance promised to seal the villagers' return to peace. The stage was a vision of elegance, draped in crimson curtains with a backdrop of a moonlit Verona, perfect for Romeo and Juliet. Lila, radiant in a gown of midnight blue, stepped into the spotlight, her presence commanding as she spoke Juliet's lines with a depth that hushed the crowd. Gone was the tremor of fear Miss Marple had seen in her eyes. In its place was a fire, tempered by the trials she'd endured. The villagers, from Mrs. Bantry to young Jenny, watched in awe, their applause a warm wave that rolled through the hall. Miss Marple's gaze, however, wandered beyond the stage. Clara Henshaw, seated a few rows back, clapped with a tight smile, her rivalry with Lila softened but not erased. Edmund Drake, his debts exposed but his role in the plot minor, fidgeted in his seat, his eyes on the exit as if longing to escape. His own shame, Sophie Lane, reinstated as an understudy at Lila's insistence, sat quietly, her rose-etched bracelet glinting as she wiped a tear. The absence of Mr. Finch, now in custody, was a silent relief. His arsenic vial and vengeful motives locked away with him. As the play reached its tragic climax, Lila's performance soared, her voice weaving love and loss into a tapestry that held the audience spellbound. Miss Marple, her knitting needles still, reflected on the human frailties she'd uncovered envy in Clara's barbs, desperation in Edmund's schemes, grief in Sophie's threats, and vengeance in Finch's poison. They echoed the quiet dramas of St. Mary Mead, like the time old Mr. Harrow's jealousy nearly cost a neighbour his livelihood, or when a widow's hidden love letter mended a family's rift. People, she mused, were both the puzzle and the solution, their hearts as predictable as they were complex. The final scene drew thunderous applause, Lila taking her bow with a grace that belied the week's terrors. The villagers surged forward, offering flowers and praise, their faces alight with pride for their adopted star. Miss Marple remained seated, her eyes tracing Lila's smile, now free of its haunted edge. The performance had been a triumph, a cleansing of the shadows that had clung to the manor after the curtain fell. Leela invited Miss Marple to a quiet corner of the hall, where a small table held a teapot and 2 cups. The actress's hands were steady as she poured, her eyes warm with gratitude. "You saved me, Miss Marple," she said, her voice soft, "not just from poison or a blade, but from living in fear. I thought the stage was my only truth, but you've shown me there's more honesty, kindness, a life beyond the footlights." Miss Marple smiled, her fingers brushing the teacup's rim. "My dear, you've always had that strength. I merely helped you see it. The village has a way of teaching us what matters, doesn't it?" Leela nodded, her gaze drifting to the crowd, dispersing into the night. "I think I'll stay a while longer," she said. "St. Mary Mead has a charm I didn't expect. Perhaps I'll write a play about it, one with a happier ending." They laughed, the sound a gentle bridge between their worlds. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning over the week's events. The earring had been Clara's, dropped in a moment of spiteful snooping. The glove, Sophie's left in a panic. The cigarette case, Marina's, passed to Sophie as a keepsake. The diary, a stagehand's record of Marina's downfall. and the velvet cloth, Finch's, torn in his final flight. Each clue had led her to the truth, not through grand gestures, but through the quiet patterns of human nature. As she walked home, her stick tapping softly on the cobblestones, the village was a portrait of tranquility. The manor's lights glowed. In the distance, no longer ominous but welcoming, a beacon of stories yet to be told. Miss Marple paused by her gate, the stars above a mirror to her thoughts, clear, orderly, and infinite. The mystery of Leela's deadly doom had unravelled, justice served, and friendships forged in its wake. Finch's arrest had closed the case, Sophie's redemption had begun, and Leela's courage had shone brighter than any spotlight dot inside her cottage. Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting resuming its familiar rhythm. The village slept, its secrets laid bare, its peace restored. There would be no next act, no lingering threat to disturb the quiet. The puzzle was complete, its pieces fitted with a satisfying click, and Miss Marple felt the contentment of a story well ended. Merry Mead, with its timeless charm, would go on. Its dramas small but its heart vast, a stage where truth always found its final bow.